But I keep coming back to this point. Is it best to have a coalition then that is then run by the ANC, EFF, and PA? Or is it better to have a coalition run by DA, IFP, ActionSA, Freedom Front, and PA? Surely the latter has to be a better option.
All right, so I'm your host, Donald Brown, and we've got with us Michael Beaumont, who is, of course, the chairperson of ActionSA. So, Michael, to start off with, first of all, welcome back to the show. To start off with, can you help our viewers understand what just happened in Johannesburg with the motion of no confidence? I think there's a lot of confusion. What just happened in Johannesburg?
Yeah, I think hugely regrettable, Donald, especially to the residents of Joburg, most of all. But really, a motion of no confidence had been filed months and months ago by ActionSA. The ANC and their coalition had done everything in their powers to cancel meetings and avoid that motion coming. And then when it did come, only 2 weeks after we had signed a multi-party charter for South Africa, which we all saw as a game changer and a momentum shifter across the country. The opportunity existed for us to do what we needed to do. The PA had come to us and said that they want to come on board nationally, and they realized to do so they need to clear the air locally. They had a proposal that would result in the coalition taking back Joburg, and you can imagine what a shot in the arm that would have been for the national and provincial project to claim back the most important metro. And the events of this week have demonstrated just how important really it is. And from that point of view, it was hugely disappointing where commitments had been made by the DA leader on the sidelines of the multi-party charter that they would negotiate an arrangement. And yet the following week, their negotiators were unavailable before a letter was received saying they will not negotiate, they will not work with the PA, they won't support the motion of no confidence, and they will rather be trying to dissolve the council, which is an absurd suggestion when you understand that dissolving a council needs a 2/3 majority, but the DA is not willing to negotiate a basic 51% majority. So from that point of view, hugely disappointed, but necessary to say, we remain very committed to the multi-party charter. There will be setbacks. Politics, it's part of the game, and we need to endure those setbacks, certainly with the deepest of sympathies to the residents of Joburg, who are having to pay the price for who the DA will and won't work with. But we continue, we've engaged our partners in the charter, and we move forward.
Just for clarity, if I'm getting you right, are you saying that the Democratic Alliance agreed to negotiate with the PA to reclaim Johannesburg and they reneged on that promise?
Yeah, absolutely. So they agreed to negotiate with all of us, including the PA. And then when their negotiators came in, they refused to live up to that expectation, which has been hugely disappointing, because it's also important to remember we signed a charter that said we will judge parties who come to us based on their forward-looking commitment to our project, i.e. we would not hold the baggage of the past against them. And yet that's exactly what happened in this exercise. And an important national partner that could have been part of this arrangement has now left and will not return. I think it's also important for me to say, Donald, because often in telling these stories, it can seem like, we are the spokespeople of the PA. The PA is not a perfect party. We have many criticisms. We share them directly with the PA from time to time. But from a Joburg point of view, and one may fear from a national point of view, it is important to understand where political party stock is rising and where they will have influence in the balance of power in future elections. And I think it's that perspective why we are exercised by this particular point.
Do you agree with your leader, Mr. Mashaba, that the Patriotic Alliance is actually more trustworthy than the Democratic Alliance?
Well, certainly I do, actually, because when you consider that the PA has been at the negotiating table, and I speak about that table as someone who sat at it in the negotiations. They were at the table in January, in April, and are now again in August, willing to come on board, willing to deliver Johannesburg, and willing to deliver a whole slew of municipalities across the country. And it has been the DA that has reneged on those agreements or refused to accept them. So I think from that point of view, certainly it is been in the DA hands many times to solve that problem, but one gets the sense the DA doesn't want to solve the problem. I think what we see is Western Cape politics playing out here. where the DA wants the PA to be in bed with the ANC so they can decampaign them in the likely Safar campaign that the DA has become famous for. And they're going to say that the PA is going to bring the ANC through the back door of Cape Town. And a PA that is working with the ANC is probably more of an electoral threat. I think what's sad about that is that had Joburg been city of Cape Town, probably every effort would have been made to save it. It's just sad that the biggest metro in our country and our economic hub appears to be expendable because of Western Cape politics.
Mm. Do you see any potential of, so the motion failed, do you see any potential of the Joburg, the current government Joburg being removed?
I do. We regarded our withdrawal of our motion as temporary. We maintain that. We will not give up on the residents of Joburg no matter what. I think we must also understand, and we conveyed this to our partners in the charter last night. If we say Gauteng is the most winnable province for our charter in 2024, Joburg is half of Gauteng's population. You can't give up on the residents of Joburg and have a realistic election offer to Gauteng in 2024. And from that point of view, we won't give up. And I was very pleased to see that there appears to be consensus that the whole group will not give up, and we will return to the table and we will continue working to resolve this. So I think certainly a light at the end of a very dark tunnel.
Mm. If you believe a DA walked back their commitments, why don't you withdraw from the multi-party charter?
Sure, and there have been people who suggested that, many in our own party who are quite disillusioned about our persistence in these arrangements in the face of that kind of DA treatment. But I'd suggest this is where ActionSA is different from parties like the PA, because we don't enter these arrangements because of other parties. We enter these arrangements because of the people of South Africa. The people of South Africa have indicated that change is necessary. We align around a change agenda, and that change agenda has to involve the DA from a mathematical standpoint. It's just a simple fact of arithmetic. So from that point of view, we will align around any group of parties that will produce change. And walking away from that project because we are mistreated or other political parties are treated arrogantly by the DA is punishing the people of South Africa. We can't do that. And if we are mistreated or we are treated arrogantly, we will deal with those issues in kind. And you will have seen this week, we have dealt most decisively with what we regard to be a failure to live up to that charter. And we will do so unapologetically because, Donald, it's important for people to understand that when you sign a charter or you are a coalition partner, that doesn't make you the cheerleaders or the mbongis of your partners. We are an independent political party with our own brand and very proud identity. And if any political party fails to live up to the standards of that agreement, we will hold them publicly accountable. We are public institutions that make decisions affecting the lives of millions of people. And you can't just say we'll deal with this privately like a family matter. We need to deal with these things out in the open, and we will. And if we ever fall short of that standard ourselves, I invite our partners to be as critical of us.
What do you see as the problem with the DA from your side? Do you think it's the FedEx that is the problem? That the leader, John Steenhuisen, agrees to something and then he goes back to the FedEx, and that's where the roadblocks come in?
It's been a very long time since I was last in that party, so I don't think I would recognize it if I walk back in there now. And certainly all I can really comment on was the symptom. But certainly it does appear that you can sit down and secure a commitment to negotiate with the leader of the party. And then days later, people who are meant to be the subordinates of that person are unavailable to the very same negotiation to which the leader has committed that party, it's unprecedented. If Herman commits ActionSA to negotiations, the people he designates to be there go there. And it has to work that way. But certainly, I think the DA has demonstrated a failure of leadership in many ways in these local government coalitions, because ultimately the so-called anchor party, which the DA often likes to go with the plus sides of being the bigger party, only we can and we are the biggest and don't waste your vote on a small party, etc. But they're not willing to do any of the responsibilities that come with being the biggest party, because that's the thing. There's a double-edged sword. To be the biggest party, it comes with all the perks, but it also comes with the responsibilities. And around the world, the biggest party has to be the most magnanimous, the most sacrificing for the greater good. But here it looks like the DA will continue to make decisions in its own narrow self-interest at the expense of the greater project. Case in point, Johannesburg this week.
Do you believe that in the recent Zondo Commission, the report implicated the Patriotic Alliance was funded by the ANC? Do you believe that narrative?
Certainly, we are looking into those particular claims. I think personally, it is not something that we regard to have been a founding of the Zondo Commission that can be relied upon for decision making. But really, what we can really base our decisions on from a coalition standpoint is whether or not we can work dependably with the political party. And as I've said to you, in this coalition, there certainly has been instability brought about by the PA. I'm not going to be the PA's publicist in that regard. I'm not here to say that the PA is perfect in any way. They have shortcomings, as I'm sure we do as well. But I keep coming back to this point. Is it best to have a coalition then that is then run by the ANC, EFF, and PA? Or is it better to have a coalition run by DA, IFP, ActionSA, Freedom Front, and PA? Surely the latter has to be a better option. Because while the DA likes to favor us with these narratives, they have gone out there and defined the DA and the ANC and the EFF as a doomsday scenario. Okay, it's dramatic, but fair enough, that's their perspective. But what's worse than doomsday? Because clearly, if they are willing to allow the doomsday scenario to continue running the economic hub of our country ahead of a provincial election where Gauteng is so important, clearly something is worse than a doomsday scenario that they are trying to prevent. And in my opinion, Donald, it is allowing any of their coalition partners the opportunity to lead. Because what we said to the DA in the scenario is saying, look, you are an independent party and you have every right to make your decisions. They might be weird and we don't have to agree with them, but it's not us to agree with your decisions. They're yours. But surely then, if you are not willing to take up the mantle of leadership, which is your right once again, why not let the mantle pass to one of your partners for you to allow them to govern with your support? And yet that seemed to be an option even worse than the doomsday scenario. That's strange.
Michael, who are the funders behind the Multiparty Charter? Because I've interviewed Reverend Kenneth Meshwe, and he says he's not interested in joining this charter because he's unwilling to be associated with these quote-unquote funders. So is there a concern there, or what do you think of that?
It's a strange point of view, and I won't criticize Reverend Meshwe. We regard the fact that he should be with us, and I think we're working behind the scenes to bring him with us. But certainly what needs to be made apparent is there are no funders of the Multi-Party Charter at all. The Multi-Party Charter, the only expenses that have arisen have been that convention. It was funded individually by the political parties. And the political parties at this convention and at this charter fund themselves. We all have our own donors. You've seen them disclosed every quarter by the IEC. And that's the only fundraising revenue that comes into this collective of parties. There is no collective fundraising, and there has been no such discussion to date. So it seems to be in a bit of a rabbit hole that we would encourage the Reverend and any other critic to not go down, because it's quite frankly a red herring of kind.
Mm. Are you satisfied with the DA's commitment that they won't work with the ANC?
Well, certainly I think what arose from the Multi-Party Charter was a positive commitment, and I think we must be clear about that. We fought very hard for a declaration that was unequivocal, and I think we have achieved a declaration where parties have made such a statement about not working with the ANC that if any party then goes and does that, because effectively these agreements are not legally binding. I can't go to a court and say to a court, uphold this agreement and stop the DA doing A, B, and C. But what I can say is that they would injure themselves so badly by virtue of, the decision to leave this arrangement and join such an arrangement, that they would be paying for that for the rest of what should probably be a very short political lifespan that follows. So I think that's the safeguards and guarantees that were achieved. But certainly, as mentioned earlier, what is frustrating is that you then go and see 2 weeks later, when it is time to back up words with actions, that those actions aren't taken in a place as important and public as Johannesburg, which was the opportunity to prove that point. I think that has been somewhat of a dent in the image of that commitment. But We said to the DA last night, and we'll say going forward, that this is a long-term project, and we will continue working with them if they are willing to continue demonstrating a commitment to these things, but there can never be a repeat of what happened to Joburg again.
Otherwise?
Well, let's agree that the Charter has very explicit terms about parties being in this agreement. And for example, if a party is in breach of this agreement, which is what we contended as it related to the city of Johannesburg, a motion can be brought to the Multiparty Charter to sanction one of the parties in the Charter and or even remove them from the Charter. And we would very seriously consider those kind of measures if it became necessary in future, because we take our commitment to being an alternative to the ANC so seriously that we would not allow a commitment that is signed in writing not to be lived up in actions going forward.
But doesn't it mean, removing the DA from the multi-party charter, doesn't that to a certain degree nullify the charter?
Well, no, but I think it must be clear that certainly wouldn't be an objective. We are here to build a majority. We aren't looking for a multi-party charter minority. That is why we have been so dedicated about broadening parties to this agreement. And removing the DA from the charter would not be a good idea. We would lose that prospect of a majority. But certainly it is what the charter envisions as a last resort if political parties do not adhere to its provisions. And certainly it will be the ongoing case that any failure of any party to live up to the commitments in this agreement, including ActionSA, will be brought before the charter for the group of parties to decide what to do with it.
And the ActionSA is committed to not working with the EFF as well.
Absolutely. I think we must be very clear from a standpoint of where the EFF is now. The EFF's conduct, I think, has deeply worsened over time. And certainly when you consider the national and provincial dimensions of the forthcoming election, the EFF operates on a different planet to ActionSA from a way of solutions. You can talk about pragmatic working relationships at a local government level. Perhaps even that, I think, has been dented of late. But the idea that you could co-govern with the EFF at a national level, where issues like economic direction, foreign policy, etc., really do dominate the political landscape, would be absolutely untenable, because you wouldn't be able to produce a coherent ideology in that regard, and that would fundamentally fail.
And does your party condemn Mr. Malema's singing Kill the Boer song?
Absolutely, and there's no equivocation in that regard. It's absolutely acceptable to understand that we have a history, and that history deserves to be retold in words and songs, etc. But we need to recognize in 2023 that song doesn't belong in a South African context where we are trying to build one country and where we do not want to have hate speech, and we do not want to have people who live in fear. And from that point of view, I think we need to recognize that that song doesn't belong in the modern South African lexicon. And I think from that perspective, there really can be no equivocation.